What if the NBA world's most uncomfortable conversation is no longer something people can quietly scroll past? And what if one of basketball's biggest legends is suddenly finding out that his legacy is no longer protected by trophies, highlights, or Hall of Fame speeches? Because right now, that is exactly the kind of storm social media says is building around Karl Malone. For years, his name lived in two completely different worlds. In one world, he was the mailman, an NBA icon, a scoring machine, a face of basketball history. But in the other world, the internet never stopped whispering about the past, the old allegations, the resurfaced stories, and the uncomfortable questions that never fully went away. And now, according to a wave of online reactions, podcast clips, fan debates, and commentary videos, those whispers are getting louder than ever. And here's where things get even messier. Some viewers are now claiming that several NBA voices, former players and basketball insiders, are refusing to publicly step in and defend him as this latest backlash explodes online. No polished statements, no passionate interviews, no big-name legend jumping out front to say, "Hold on, let's talk about this." And that silence? Fans are shocked by it. Because in the court of public opinion, silence can feel louder than words. Social media is already asking the question no one in sports media seems comfortable answering. Is Karl Malone panicking because the protection he once had is finally disappearing? Are old stories coming back with even more force because a younger generation is hearing them for the first time? And if the NBA's inner circle really is keeping its distance, what does that say about how serious this moment has become? Emotions are running high, fans are deeply divided, and the basketball world is once again being forced to confront a name many thought would stay untouchable forever. So what is really going on here, and why does it suddenly feel like the walls are closing in? Because once we break down the reports, the reactions, and the silence, this story gets a whole lot darker. The strangest part about this entire situation is not even the old story itself. It is the way the room seems to change the moment Karl Malone's name comes up now. And according to the wave of online commentary that has been exploding across sports channels, podcasts, and fan pages, that shift is becoming impossible to ignore. Because people are not just talking about what was said, they are talking about who is not saying anything at all. For years, the unspoken rule around certain sports legends seemed obvious. No matter what storm hit, no matter what old headline resurfaced, no matter how ugly the public conversation got, there was always some layer of protection around the biggest names. Maybe it came through media spin, maybe it came through selective silence, maybe it came through fans deciding to separate greatness on the court from everything off of it. But whatever that shield was, a lot of people online are now saying it does not look nearly as strong around Karl Malone as it once did. And that is where the panic narrative reportedly starts. Because the internet is convinced that this is no longer just about a scandal from the past being rediscovered. This is about something far more dangerous in celebrity culture. This is about social permission collapsing in real time. Once people feel like they no longer have to pretend not to notice something, everything changes. Conversations get harsher, reactions get louder, old clips come back, old interviews get rewatched, old quotes get pulled apart line by line, and suddenly the same name that used to bring up career stats and all-time rankings starts triggering a completely different response. One sports creator put it in the bluntest way possible during a live stream that quickly starts regular line. This isn't a redemption era, this is a re-examination era, and a lot of people are not surviving those. That line spread fast, and fans are shocked by how many people seem to agree with it. Because what is happening now, according to all these reports and reactions flooding the timeline, feels less like a random controversy and more like a complete image collapse. Not because one new legal revelation suddenly appeared out of nowhere, but because younger audiences are discovering the story for the first time and reacting without any emotional loyalty to the basketball mythology that protected him for decades. And that generational divide is where emotions ran high almost instantly. Older fans jumped in saying people are trying to erase basketball history. They argued that the internet is too quick to drag every legacy through the mud. They accused newer creators of using outrage for clicks. Some even said this latest wave is being blown out of proportion by channels trying to force a villain narrative for engagement. But younger viewers were not having that at all.
Their reaction was colder, sharper, and way less sentimental. They were basically saying, why are we acting like silence and image management should matter more than what people are hearing about now? And that is where the entire tone of the conversation reportedly started to turn from uncomfortable to explosive. Because the more the story spread, the more one question kept showing up everywhere. Where are the NBA legends now? Where are the retired stars who always have something to say about every major sports controversy? Where are the former teammates, the respected veterans, the All-Star Weekend insiders, the old-school defenders who usually rush in to protect one of their own? Why does it suddenly feel like everybody is backing away from this one? And in celebrity culture, silence never stays neutral for long. That silence starts getting interpreted, analyzed, turned into thumbnails, clipped into theories. And once that happens, a whole new story begins forming around the original one. Because now it is not just what happened in the past. Now it becomes, why is no one willing to stand beside him in the present? That second question is the one that has really set social media on fire. One basketball commentary page claimed that several big names have privately decided this is not a fight worth touching. Another viral thread suggested that there's growing discomfort behind the scenes whenever his name gets attached to league nostalgia content. Nobody was presenting official proof, but that did not stop the internet from running with it. And once the speculation machine starts moving, it does not need confirmation to create pressure. It just needs momentum. And momentum is exactly what this story seems to have right now. Fans started revisiting old public appearances, old ceremonial moments, old ambassador roles, old all-star clips, and asking a much darker question than anyone seemed ready for. Was the basketball world too comfortable putting him on a pedestal while assuming the audience either wouldn't know or wouldn't care? That question hit especially hard because it's not just about one man anymore. It's about the system around him, the image machine, the league memory, the selective way sports history gets packaged and sold back to fans like a clean museum exhibit, even when the reality behind certain names is a lot messier than the banners hanging above the court. And according to the most dramatic version of this online narrative, that is exactly what has allegedly left Karl Malone feeling exposed in a way he hasn't been before. Not because people are merely criticizing him, public figures survive criticism all the time. The real problem, according to the commentary, is that this criticism is now happening without resistance. That changes everything. Because once the room stops protecting you, every old story starts sounding newer, every old headline starts feeling heavier, every old image starts carrying a different energy, and the public begins to treat you less like a legend under attack and more like a symbol of something they are tired of watching powerful institutions ignore. That shift is brutal, and if the internet is right, it may be the exact shift now swallowing his name whole. One former player turned podcaster reportedly danced around the issue in a way that fans immediately picked up on. When asked during a panel whether today's players should still celebrate every old-school icon without question, he paused, smirked awkwardly, and said, "Some legacies need a longer conversation than people want to have." That was all he said. But online, that one sentence landed like a bomb. Because fans instantly began reading between the lines. Was that a subtle shot? Was that someone in the basketball world finally hinting that not every legend is being viewed the same behind closed doors? Was that a warning that the old "respect the greats no matter what" code is starting to crack? You can already guess what happened next. Clips spread. Reaction channels reacted to reaction channels. Fan accounts posted dramatic edits with dark music and captions like, "The truth is catching up." Old footage got paired with new commentary, and before long, the internet had built a full emotional arc around the idea that Karl Malone is now watching his legacy slip out of his hands, while the very people who once represented basketball brotherhood are allegedly choosing not to step in. And if that is even halfway true, then the emotional stakes here are way bigger than one trending scandal. Because imagine spending decades inside a protected world where your name is always introduced with reverence, where your records are repeated like scripture, where your image is frozen in bronze and highlight reels and ceremony speeches, only to suddenly realize that the outside world is no longer reacting to you with admiration first. That would be terrifying for any public figure, especially one whose identity
has been built so heavily around status, respect, and historical importance. And this is where some of the commentary starts getting really personal. Because a lot of people online are not just framing this as a public relations problem, they are framing it as a humiliation problem. They are saying the real nightmare for someone like Karl Malone would not just be criticism, it would be watching people he once stood beside act like they would rather not be associated with the conversation at all. That kind of silence cuts differently. It is one thing for random internet users to turn on you. Celebrities can dismiss that as noise. It is another thing entirely when the silence seems to be coming from inside your own world. That is when the family of basketball starts looking divided. And once fans began sensing that possibility, they started going back and studying every recent mention of his name like detectives. Every awkward pause, every carefully worded answer, every moment where someone pivoted away from the topic instead of rushing to defend it. And the more they watched, the more convinced they became that this was not random. This was distance. Intentional distance. Strategic distance.
the kind of distance people create when they know a story is radioactive, and they don't want any of the fallout landing on them. And if that's truly what is happening here, then the panic reports suddenly make a lot more sense. Because what do you do when the legend status that once acted like armor no longer feels bulletproof? What do you do when the people you assumed would at least help soften the blow are nowhere to be found? What do you do when the conversation is no longer happening on your terms, and the audience hearing it now has no emotional reason to protect your image the way older generations once did? According to the way this story is being told online, that's exactly the emotional corner Karl Malone may be trapped in now. And the worst part is, some fans believe this entire situation is only getting started. And the more this conversation keeps spreading, the more it starts to feel like something bigger than just one viral moment. Because once a story like this catches momentum, it begins pulling in everything around it. Old clips, old interviews, old relationships, even moments that once felt harmless suddenly start getting reinterpreted through a completely different lens. That's exactly what fans are saying is happening now. Because after the initial shockwave of reactions hit, people didn't just stop at the headline, they went digging. Not necessarily for new evidence, but for context, for patterns, for anything that could help them understand why this situation feels so different from the way things were handled before. And what they found, at least according to the online narrative, only made the conversation more intense. Fans started revisiting older public appearances where Karl Malone was celebrated, award ceremonies, all-star weekends, interviews where he was introduced with nothing but praise. And suddenly, those same moments began to feel uncomfortable to a lot of viewers who are seeing this history for the first time. Not because the footage changed, but because their perception of it did. One fan commented under a trending clip, "It's crazy how different something feels once you know more about the person." That comment alone got thousands of likes, and it perfectly captured the shift that seems to be happening. Because perception is everything. Once the audience stops seeing someone as just a legend and starts seeing them as a controversial figure, every image attached to that name begins to carry a different weight. Every smile looks different. Every speech sounds different. Every moment of praise feels questionable. And that shift is what fuels the emotional tension in this story. But things really escalated when the conversation moved from past actions to present reactions. Because now people aren't just asking what happened back then, they're asking how people today are choosing to respond to it. And according to the flood of social media commentary, that response is being described in one word over and over again: silence. Fans are shocked by how consistent that silence feels. No strong public defenses, no emotional speeches about loyalty, no former teammates stepping forward to say, "We need to look at the full picture." Instead, what people are noticing is hesitation, vague answers, careful wording, and in some cases, complete avoidance. One sports panel discussion clip went viral for exactly this reason. A host brought up Karl Malone's name while discussing controversial legacies in sports. The energy in the room reportedly shifted immediately. One panelist looked down, another adjusted his mic. Someone else tried to pivot the conversation towards statistics and career achievements, but the host pushed again, asking directly, should legends still be celebrated the same way?
When these kinds of stories resurface, there was a long pause, and that pause told viewers everything they felt they needed to know. Because in moments like that, people are not just listening to what is said, they are watching what is not said. They are reading body language, tone, hesitation. They are analyzing the discomfort itself. And discomfort spreads faster than any statement ever could. After that clip went viral, fans began building an entire narrative around the idea that the NBA community is quietly stepping back. Not publicly condemning, not openly defending, just creating distance. And distance, in a situation like this, can feel like a verdict. One viral tweet summed it up in a way that hit hard. When nobody defends you, that says more than any accusation ever could. That line exploded across timelines, getting reposted by multiple sports pages and reaction channels. And once that idea took hold, everything else started falling into place around it. People began connecting dots that may or may not actually be connected. They started asking why certain legends who are usually vocal about protecting the history of the game have not spoken up. They questioned why no major figure has come forward with a strong statement of support. They even began speculating about private conversations happening behind the scenes. Of course, none of that is confirmed, but in the world of online storytelling, confirmation is not always what drives engagement. Emotion does. And the emotion right now is suspicion, because the more silent things appear, the more the audience starts filling in the blanks themselves. They begin imagining what those private conversations might sound like.
They start creating scenarios where former teammates are choosing their words carefully, where league insiders are deciding this topic is too risky to touch, where media personalities are avoiding the issue to protect their own reputations. And once those imagined scenarios start spreading, they begin to feel real. That is the power of perception in moments like this. But there is another layer to this situation that is making everything even more intense, and that is the role of newer fans. Because unlike older generations who watched Karl Malone's career in real time, many of today's viewers are encountering his story through viral clips, commentary videos, and short-form content that is designed to hit hard and fast. They are not coming into this with nostalgia. They are not attached to the memories of his greatest games. They are not emotionally invested in protecting his legacy. They are reacting to what they see right now. And that reaction is raw. One content creator explained it in a way that quickly went viral. He said, "This generation doesn't care about your stats if your story doesn't sit right with them." That line got repeated across multiple platforms, becoming almost like a slogan for how differently younger audiences are approaching these conversations. And that difference is creating tension, because now you have two completely different perspectives colliding in real time. On one side, you have fans who believe that sports history should be respected, that legacy should not be rewritten based on modern reactions, that context matters, and that people should not be reduced to their worst headlines. On the other side, you have viewers who are saying that information matters more than nostalgia, that accountability should not have an expiration date, and that silence from influential figures only makes things worse. And right in the middle of that clash is Karl Malone. Caught between generations, caught between narratives, caught between a past that was once quietly managed and a present that refuses to stay quiet. And according to the way this story is being told online, that position is becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Because the louder the conversation gets, the harder it becomes to ignore. And the harder it becomes to ignore, the more pressure builds on everyone connected to it. Not just him, but the entire basketball community. Because now, people are not just asking about Karl Malone. They are asking about the system that surrounded him. They are asking about how certain stories stayed buried for so long. They are asking why some controversies seem to receive immediate consequences, while others appear to fade into the background. They are asking whether the league itself has been selective in how it handles uncomfortable narratives. And those questions are much bigger than one person. That is what makes the situation feel so volatile. Because once a conversation expands beyond an individual and starts questioning the structure around them, it becomes much harder to control. It becomes less about managing one image and more about addressing an entire pattern. And patterns are much harder to defend. One analyst described it like this during a heated discussion: "People can forgive a mistake, but they
struggle to ignore a pattern." That statement instantly sparked debate, with some agreeing and others pushing back hard. But regardless of which side people are on, one thing is clear. The conversation is no longer contained. It is spreading. It is evolving. It is pulling in more voices, more opinions, more interpretations. And with every new reaction, the pressure around Karl Malone seems to grow. Because now it is not just about what happened, it is about how the world is choosing to react to it today. And in the world of public perception, today is all that matters. One moment in particular really captured how intense things have become. During a live stream, a well-known basketball personality was asked directly whether he would publicly defend Karl Malone if given the chance. Instead of answering immediately, he leaned back, sighed, and said, "That's not something I'm touching." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up, just a refusal. And that refusal instantly went viral. Because in a space where opinions are usually loud and immediate, choosing not to speak can feel like the loudest statement of all. Fans replayed that clip over and over again, analyzing every second of it: the hesitation, the tone, the decision to step away from the question entirely. And the conclusion many of them came to was simple: this is not a conversation people feel comfortable defending. And if that is true, then the situation becomes even more complicated. Because now, the narrative is no longer just about past actions, it is about present isolation. It is about what happens when a figure who was once surrounded by support suddenly appears to be standing alone in the middle of a storm. And that image, whether accurate or not, is incredibly powerful. Because isolation changes how people view everything. It makes the story feel more dramatic. It makes the stakes feel higher. It makes the audience lean in closer, trying to understand what is really happening behind the scenes. And according to the wave of reactions we are seeing right now, that sense of isolation is exactly what is driving this story forward. Because if the silence continues, if the distance keeps growing, if no one steps forward to shift the narrative, then the question everyone is asking is only going to get louder. Why is nobody defending him? And more importantly, what does that silence really mean? And once that question starts echoing everywhere, the situation shifts from uncomfortable to deeply personal. Because now the conversation is no longer just about public perception or media narratives.
it starts to feel like something closer to rejection. And that is where things reportedly take an even heavier turn. Because in celebrity culture, being criticized is almost expected. Every major figure deals with backlash at some point. But what hits differently is when the usual circle of support seems to disappear at the exact moment you might need it the most. That is the part fans are reacting to with the strongest emotions right now. They are not just debating the past anymore. They're reacting to what feels like a present-day distancing. And according to the way this narrative is spreading online, that distancing is being interpreted as a quiet form of judgment. One fan wrote, "If people who know you best won't speak up, that says everything." That comment alone sparked thousands of replies, with people arguing back and forth about whether silence should actually be taken as a sign of agreement or just a decision to stay out of controversy. But regardless of where people stood, the emotional tone of the conversation was undeniable. Emotions ran high. Because for some viewers, this feels like a long overdue reckoning. For others, it feels like a targeted takedown. And for a third group, it feels like something even more complicated, a collision between truth, memory, and reputation that nobody really knows how to handle. And right in the middle of all that, the idea that Karl Malone might be panicking has taken on a life of its own. Not because there is any official confirmation of it, but because it fits the story people are building in their heads. Think about it. If you were someone whose name had been celebrated for decades, whose identity was tied to respect and recognition, and suddenly you felt that respect slipping away in real time, how would you react? Would you stay silent? Would you try to address it? Would you hope it passes like previous waves did? These are the kinds of questions fans are asking, and the answers they are imagining are fueling the narrative even further. Some believe he is choosing not to respond, because saying anything could make things worse. Others think there may be conversations happening behind the scenes that the public is not aware of. And then there are those who are convinced that the silence itself is proof that the situation is more serious than anyone wants to admit. None of these theories are confirmed.
But that has not slowed anything down, because once a story reaches this level of attention, it becomes less about facts and more about momentum. People start interpreting every move, every absence, every lack of response as part of a larger picture. And that picture, according to many online voices, is starting to look like isolation. One of the most talked about moments came from a recent panel discussion where a former player was asked directly whether the league should continue celebrating all past legends equally. Instead of giving a clear answer, he shifted in his seat, glanced at the other panelists, and said, "There are conversations happening that fans don't always see." That one sentence was enough to send the internet into another wave of speculation. What conversations? Who is involved? What decisions are being made behind closed doors? And most importantly, how does Karl Malone fit into all of it? Fans immediately began building theories around that statement. Some suggested that the league might be rethinking how certain figures are presented in official events. Others believed that players themselves are becoming more selective about who they publicly align with. And a few went even further, claiming that this could be the beginning of a much larger shift in how sports history is handled moving forward. Again, none of that is confirmed, but in the world of online storytelling, possibilities can feel just as powerful as reality. And the more those possibilities spread, the more intense the conversation becomes. Because now it is not just about one individual, it is about the future of legacy itself. Fans are starting to ask whether being great on the court should be enough to guarantee lifelong celebration. They are questioning whether the standards for public figures are changing. They are debating whether the next generation of players and fans will continue to honor the same names in the same way. And those debates are getting heated. One side argues that history should not be rewritten based on modern reactions. They say that greatness should be recognized regardless of personal controversy. They warn that if this kind of scrutiny becomes the norm, no legacy will be safe. The other side pushes back just as strongly. They argue that information changes how people view history, and that ignoring uncomfortable truths only delays necessary conversations. They say that respect should not be automatic, and that silence from influential figures only makes things more complicated. And as those two perspectives clash, the situation around Karl Malone continues to intensify, because he has become the center of a much larger discussion, not just about what happened, but about how it is being handled now. And according to the reactions we are seeing, that handling is what people are focusing on the most. Because if there were strong voices stepping forward to defend him, the narrative might look completely different. If there were clear statements addressing the situation, the conversation might have a different tone. If there were visible support from respected figures, the sense of isolation might not feel as strong. But right now, what people are noticing is the absence of those things. And absence creates space. Space for speculation.
space for interpretation, space for emotion to fill in the gaps. And that's exactly what is happening. One particularly viral video broke down this idea in a way that resonated with a lot of viewers. The creator said, "This isn't just about what people are saying, it's about what nobody is willing to say." That line quickly became one of the most repeated phrases in the entire conversation, because it captures the tension perfectly. The tension between what is known and what is avoided. The tension between public image and private reality. The tension between a legacy that was once untouchable and a present moment that feels anything but. And as that tension builds, the emotional weight of the situation continues to grow, because now every new reaction adds another layer. Every new comment adds another perspective. Every new clip adds another piece to the puzzle. And the puzzle itself is becoming harder to ignore. Some fans are starting to express sympathy, not necessarily for the situation, but for the pressure of watching a lifetime of reputation come under scrutiny all at once. They are pointing out how quickly public opinion can shift, how unforgiving the internet can be, how difficult it must be to navigate a moment like this. Others are far less sympathetic. They are arguing that this kind of scrutiny is exactly what should happen when serious topics resurface. They are saying that discomfort is part of accountability, that difficult conversations are necessary, and that avoiding them only prolongs the problem. And that divide is making the entire situation even more intense, because there is no clear resolution, no agreed-upon outcome, no single narrative
that everyone can rally around. Instead, there is a constant back and forth, a push and pull between different perspectives, each one fueled by its own logic, its own emotions, its own interpretation of what is happening. And in the middle of all that noise, the idea of Karl Malone panicking continues to grow. Not because anyone has confirmed it, but because it feels like the kind of reaction that would make sense in a moment like this. A moment where the past is no longer distant. A moment where the present feels uncertain. A moment where the future of a legacy is suddenly being questioned in ways it never was before. And if there is one thing that becomes clear as you follow this story, it is that the conversation is not slowing down. If anything, it is gaining more attention with every passing day. More people are discovering it. More voices are joining in. More perspectives are being added. And with each new wave of attention, the pressure continues to build. Because once a story reaches this level, it becomes almost impossible to contain. It spreads beyond sports pages. It reaches general audiences. It becomes part of a larger cultural conversation. And that is exactly what seems to be happening here. Because this is no longer just about basketball. It is about perception. It is about accountability. It is about how the world chooses to remember and react to the figures it once celebrated without question. And as long as those questions remain unanswered, the tension surrounding this situation is only going to keep growing. And that growing tension is exactly why this story now feels bigger than one headline, one podcast clip, or one viral debate. Because at this point, the real issue is not whether people are talking, it is that they have not stopped talking. And once public attention locks onto a legacy like this, it becomes incredibly difficult to get it back under control. That is what makes this moment feel so dangerous for someone like Karl Malone, at least according to the wave of online commentary surrounding his name right now. Because legacies are usually built over decades, but in the age of viral media, they can start cracking in a matter of days. Not always because of one new revelation, but because the public suddenly decides to reframe everything they thought they knew. And that reframing appears to be happening in real time. Fans are no longer just looking at career numbers, all-time rankings, and iconic basketball memories. They are looking at the entire picture, or at least the version of that picture that is being assembled online, and asking whether the old image still holds up under modern scrutiny. For a lot of viewers, the answer seems to be no. And that is where the emotional center of this whole story really lives. Because beneath on the headlines, all the dramatic reactions, all the speculation about silence and distance, what this moment seems to reveal is something deeply uncomfortable about fame itself. Fame can protect you. Fame can elevate you. Fame can freeze your best moments in time and replay them forever. But fame can also create the illusion that certain conversations are over when they were really just postponed. And once those postponed conversations come back, they often come back louder. That is what so many people online believe they are watching now. Not just a scandal resurfacing, but a delayed collision between public memory and public accountability. And that collision is messy, because there's no clean way to separate the image from the reaction anymore. Every time people see old footage, they bring new feelings to it. Every time his name gets mentioned in a basketball conversation, there is now another layer attached to it. Every time someone avoids defending him, that silence becomes part of the story too. And that means the narrative is no longer being shaped by one event, it is being shaped by accumulation. Accumulated discomfort, accumulated questions,
accumulated silence. And when enough of that builds up, it starts to feel like a breaking point. One of the most revealing things about this entire situation is how little it has taken for the internet to construct a complete emotional storyline around it. No dramatic press conference, no explosive official statement, no public meltdown caught on camera. And yet people are still describing this as panic, collapse, isolation, and exposure. Why? Because in today's media environment, emotional absence can be just as powerful as visible chaos. If someone is not defending themselves, people assume they are overwhelmed. If no one is defending them, people assume they are alone. If the usual support system is not visible, people assume it has vanished. Those assumptions may not always be accurate, but they are incredibly powerful once they take hold. And right now, they seem to be shaping almost everything about how this story is being received. One creator described it in a way that felt almost brutal. He
said, "The internet doesn't need proof of panic. It just needs the feeling of it." That line spread quickly, because honestly, it explains a lot. This entire narrative is running on feeling. The feeling that the room has changed. The feeling that old protections are fading. The feeling that certain names are no longer untouchable in the way they once were. And once those feelings spread widely enough, they become their own kind of reality. That is why the silence from NBA voices matters so much in this story, even if none of them owe the public a statement. Because public silence does not stay empty, it gets filled with interpretation almost immediately. And interpretation is exactly what is driving this moment. Fans are interpreting the distance as disapproval. They are interpreting the hesitation as fear. They are interpreting the lack of defense as a sign that something deeper is shifting behind the scenes. Again, none of that is officially confirmed, but that is not stopping the momentum. Because once a legacy becomes the subject of internet re-examination, control starts slipping away from the person at the center of it. The conversation belongs to the crowd now, to the reaction channels, to the podcasts, to the fan edits, to the comment sections, to every person who sees the story for the first time and decides to weigh in. And that kind of public ownership is hard to fight, especially when it is powered by moral emotion. That is another reason this moment feels so volatile, because this is not just sports debate anymore. This is not just who had the better career or where should he rank all time. This is something heavier. This is about how people feel when they believe a public figure's image has been protected for too long. And when people feel that way, they do not respond casually. They respond intensely. They respond personally. They respond like they are correcting something that should have been addressed a long time ago. That is why the reactions have felt so emotional. That is why the silence has felt so loud. That is why this entire story has developed such a dramatic edge. Because to many viewers, this does not feel like a random controversy. It feels like a cultural correction. Whether that perception is fair or not is exactly what has people so divided. Some still believe this is an internet pylon, a modern audience forcing old stories into a new outrage machine without any concern for context or complexity. They think the reaction has become too theatrical, too unforgiving, too driven by clicks and shock value. Others believe the opposite. They think the only reason it feels theatrical now is because the conversation was avoided for too long. They believe the discomfort is earned. They believe the emotional intensity is the result of years of silence finally collapsing all at once. And that divide is what ensures the story is not ending anytime soon. Because as long as people remain split, the conversation keeps feeding itself. One side pushes back, the other side pushes harder. New clips appear, new reactions follow, new theories spread, and the cycle keeps going. That is the real danger of moments like this. They do not need a new event every day to stay alive. They just need enough emotional energy to keep the public engaged. And right now, this story has more than enough of that. Which brings us back to the question that has been sitting underneath everything from the beginning. If this wave of backlash really is growing the way social media claims it is, and if the silence from respected NBA voices is being noticed as strongly as fans say it is, then what happens next? Does someone eventually step in and try to reshape the narrative? Does the basketball world continue to stay quiet and let the internet define the moment? Does this become one of those stories that flans up, cools off, and then returns even stronger every few years? Or is this the point where the image finally changes for good? Those are the questions people cannot stop asking. And the truth is, nobody seems to have a clean answer. Because once public perception begins shifting at this level, it is incredibly hard to predict where it ends. Sometimes the attention fades. Sometimes the narrative sticks permanently. Sometimes the silence itself becomes the thing people remember most. And if that happens here, then this may end up being less about one man's past and more about the moment the sports world realized it could no longer rely on old mythology to control new reactions. That is why the story matters beyond the name attached to it. It is exposing something about how celebrity protection works, how institutional memory works, and how quickly all of that can start falling apart when the audience changes. Because audiences have changed. They are faster now, harsher now, less sentimental now. They are not waiting for official media to tell them what matters. They are deciding for themselves in real time. And dragging everyone else into the conversation whether they are ready or not. And for a legacy built in a very different era, that kind of environment can feel impossible to survive.
which is why so many people online are convinced that what we are seeing is not just backlash, it is fear. Fear of losing control of the narrative. Fear of watching respect turn into scrutiny. Fear of realizing that the names, rooms, and systems that once offered protection may no longer be enough. And if that really is what is happening behind the scenes, then one thing is certain. This conversation is no longer going away quietly. Because whether people see this as overdue accountability, unfair public destruction, or something messy in between, the emotional temperature around Karl Malone has clearly changed. The room feels different now. The silence feels different now. And the legacy, at least in the eyes of a growing number of fans, may never feel the same again. And that is exactly why this story has the entire internet talking right now. Because no matter which side you fall on, one thing is impossible to ignore. This conversation is not dying down anytime soon. According to the wave of reports, reactions, commentary clips, and fan debates circulating online, the pressure around Karl Malone's name seems to be growing instead of fading. And what is making this hit even harder is not just the past being discussed again, but the silence, the distance, and the feeling that the basketball world may not be rushing in to protect this legacy the way some people expected. Fans are shocked, emotions ran high, and the sports world has been left deeply divided. Some people believe this is long overdue and that the public is finally confronting a story that should have never been brushed aside. Others believe the internet is taking things too far and trying to tear down another sports icon without allowing any room for complexity. And then there are those watching all of this unfold, wondering what happens next. Because if this backlash keeps growing, the real question may not be whether the conversation stops, but whether the legacy ever fully recovers from it. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think NBA legends are really refusing to defend Karl Malone? Do you think the silence says more than any statement ever could? Or do you think social media is blowing this whole thing way out of proportion? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments, because this is one of those stories where everybody seems to have a different opinion. And trust me, the debate is only getting hotter. And if you enjoy these dramatic celebrity and sports breakdowns where we unpack the headlines, the rumors, the reactions, and the stories everybody is afraid to say out loud, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next wild update. Because if this story keeps escalating the way people think it will, you already know we are going to be right here breaking all of it down with you.